here we go. So here is the next episode of these videos. We're going to talk about a section which is an area that maybe confuses a few people in terms of top exam tips. I'm just going to go through some kind of reminders really. And I've made this question up myself. It's something that you may have looked at before, but hopefully it will give you an idea of the kind of thing that I would include if this type of question does come up. So let's have a look at this question then. So the question that I've created here is a design and experiment question, and it simply says design an experiment that investigates the impact of music on memory. Now if this was to come up something similar in an exam that you were to take, there might be a bit more information there as well, but it would normally have something like this with the bullet points. So as we look at the question in more detail, what you might want to do now is obviously pause the video and go through breaking down the question as best as you can. You might want to kind of write all around these kind of things, because these are the elements. The 4 bullet points are the only things that you have to mention in this. Okay, so hopefully you have done that. I will do what I would do here with this. So if you're gonna, obviously you've got to design the experiment or design the study, right? So in this situation, there's no right or wrong answer. And don't forget, when you justify and you explain everything that you do, there's going to be pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses of each method and each design, and each way that you choose. So there's no harm in going for something that you think, oh, but that could be criticised, because yeah, that's the kind of thing that you want to be talking about. Now when you are making your decisions with this type of question, think about which ones that you know the most, that you can elaborate the most as well. Obviously I've made this question up and I've used my wording. In certain exam boards and things they may use different phrasing, but it will look something like this. So first thing to realise is it's 12 marks. These are likely to be maybe 8 to 12. You could see this as 3, 6, 9, 12 for each bullet point, but that is not how it would be marked in most of the exam boards out there. So methods that we could make reference to, you could go down the route of the lab, you could do a field. You're obviously not going to do an observation or a correlation or anything, because this is designing an experiment. Make sure as well, this is research methods recap, you know the difference between an experimental method and experimental design. Experimental designs, you could choose maybe repeated measures, maybe the independent groups design as well. Ethical issues, and also it says there how to deal with them. So you could suggest things in the experiment but that could be ethically wrong with them, but you have to say how to deal. And then obviously inferential analysis, it sometimes says I put inferential statistics, and that's obviously your stats tests. So ethical issues, the go-to one, always confidentiality, applies to everything. You could talk about protection of harm, you could talk about all sorts. Now in terms of top tips for this style of question, the key things I would say to remember is don't write in first person. So never say I will choose this. I'd also say justify everything, and also use subheadings for clarity and coherence. So let's get rid of that. So if we now look at the type of structure of how this would look, and I just move this down slightly, like this. Okay, hopefully you can still kind of see that there. So with this, first thing you're going to do, you don't need to write out the full bullet point. You literally just put now. Often there may be a bullet point up here as well. Instead of one of these that talks about the procedure or doing, a standardized task or whatever it may be. But this, what you only talk about the bullet points. That would be another tip that I probably should have put over there. So rather than saying I will choose a lab, you're going to be saying something along the lines of for this experiment, a lab environment will be used. And then you want to describe a little bit about that. So, this will be controlled. There will be a clear IV and DV. Then you need to justify why. Why have you chosen to do that? So, you could put something like the benefits of choosing this method would be the ease of replication. So when doing, but now this has got to be linked to music and memory. So you could be saying something like, rather than just saying, this could be repeated, this would check for consistency. You want to be saying, therefore, the experiment into music on memory could be easily repeated because of the control of such variables such as the music type, etc. Now, another bullet point they sometimes put up here is to comment on the variables. So that could be like the IV, the DV, extraneous variables, those types of things. So you've really got to tailor it depending, and I've just picked 4 random bullet points to give you an idea. Now, moving on to the section there about the experimental design, obviously you would write all in here, and then you leave a line and write again, experimental design. Makes it nice and easy for the examiner. It's clear, it's coherent, and it's a lot easier for the examiner to mark and award those marks. Now, in terms of the justification for the experimental designs, you want to pick one, as I said, that you feel that you can explain. So, for example, you may want to pick an independent groups design because you can elaborate more about the the prevention of order effects and things like that. So just tactically think. But remember, another big key tip: always relate everything back to these examples with regards to music and memory. You cannot just be generic. So if I take a step back a second for the experimental method, if you wanted to choose maybe a field experiment, and you were saying there would be potentially a lack of, or it would be less prone to demand characteristics, you can't just say they'd be less prone to demand characteristics, so they'll be less likely to change their behaviour. So what you want to do at that moment is say, in what way? So they're less likely to work out what's going on in each individual condition regarding the music, and therefore are less likely to change their responses with regards to how much they remember, for example, purposely remembering less. So you're making it relevant at all times. Any example you give, you must do that. Okay, you must explain and make it relevant. So, again, same with anything like order effects or whatever you're talking about. Don't just say they may get bored or better at the task. Say what the task is, say why. Make sure you do that. Ethical issues, as I said before, you could do any deception and explain why. How would you deal with that? Obviously a debrief. But as I said before, confidentiality is normally the go-to one there, purely because it kind of applies to any, and then you can always go down the route of anonymity as well. And then finally, the inferential statistics. Now that all depends on what design you've chosen and how you're going to actually measure, etc. So you could say, because this isn't a universal measure, you would say, so you'd have your little subheading, let's just imagine, I'm just going to call it analysis just because that's probably what it would be called. I am going to just say this in terms of how I would do this. So you've got to think what stats test will be used in this situation. So in order to measure memory, I would say I'm not using a universal measure. It's something that has been created, so it's ordinal level of measurement. And then it's literally like you were justifying a stats test in a normal stats test question. So, for example, you might draw a little table to remind yourself how to do this. But let's just say, I would say the appropriate step or statistical test with regards to inferential analysis would be and then you would insert, so let's say a Mann Whitney U or a Wilcoxon test or whatever it may be, and then you justify, so this is because, and then you would say a test of difference between types of music and effects on memory, or music and no music on memory. It's the ordinal level of measurement because so justifying just like before, and it's an independent group, so whether you take part in either the rock music or silent. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that you would do there. If it mentioned anything about descriptive analysis, that's more your mean, median, mode, so measures of central tendency, and your standard deviation and range. That's slightly different. You could talk about tables, graphs, and how you display the data as well as another bullet point. But as I said, key things to remember here. Do remember just to stick to those bullet points, but also all the other tips are absolutely crucial. So designing a study, again, could obviously the big question like this is out there, but technically how to write a debrief could fall under that as well. So just be aware of the different sections and remember those top tips, and if there's any issues, any questions, let me know.